This is A Geek Leader. Hey, Geek Leaders. Welcome to episode 141 of Geek Leader Podcast. And today's episode is sponsored by Splashtop. Now, I've talked about Splashtop quite a bit, and Splashtop is the #1 remote access and support tool for MSPs. Splashtop offers a remote support premium license that includes endpoint monitoring, management features, and lots more. They recently launched a one-to-many feature. Using that, you can instantly execute or schedule routine IT tasks across multiple endpoints simultaneously. This includes tasks like mass deployments, remote command, script execution, system reboots, and Windows updates. This one-to-many feature is available for Windows and Mac. And again, I've been using Splashtop for 7 years and absolutely love it. I use it both Splashtop Personal and also at our company we use Splashtop Professional. So you can use it the enterprise version or the personal version. They both are awesome, and I recommend using them. Because sometimes you just need to remote into your systems, and running a podcast every now and then I need to check on something on my home computer, and I can just grab my phone or my iPad, remote in, take care of that, whatever task I'm looking for, reply to the email that I had downloaded somewhere else, or that bio to see if I actually got it correctly, or whatever it is. It's all there, and Splashtop makes that possible. It's also very secure and offers great security, so definitely check out Splashtop and get your 20% discount at geekleader.com/splashtop. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, we've got Charlie Gilkey, and he helps people start finishing stuff that matters. He's the founder of Productive Flourishing and the author of a book that I've got right in front of me right now called Start Finishing. And Charlie, welcome to the show.
John, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
If you don't mind, tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing now. What is Productive Flourishing? How did you get started in that, and kind of what your career path has been, so that we can set some context for our conversation?
Yeah, so I'll start in reverse chron here. So,
sure.
Or actually in chronological order. So back in about 2007, I was simultaneously pursuing my PhD in philosophy. So I'm an ethicist and social philosopher, and I was also an Army Joint Force military logistics coordinator, which is a mouthful, but it's basically making sure the Army, Air Force, and Navy had coordinated logistics operations and stuff got where it needed to go. And I just noticed that I was, at the time I was struggling, and it seems sophomoric at this point to be like, I got to get my stuff together. But at the time, it felt like I just wasn't pulling it all together. And so I did like any good scholar and officer would do, is I started researching and seeing what other people had done, because, clearly this is not just a me problem. This is it's a common problem. And I found myself having to continually translate and synthesize and reframe a lot of the material. And, I found sort of that the productivity literature tended to be too granular, too hacky, and the personal development literature tended to be too wide view and too much, not that it's too much focused on vision and priorities, but it didn't help in this sort of middle world of projects, which is where so many of us, struggle or succeed. Mm-hmm. And so as I started, reading and writing and started sharing that, that grew into the blog Productive Flourishing, which is one of the top websites in the world for the creative class, for planning, productivity, personal development, and really getting stuff done with other people. And so I've been doing this since, again, about 2007, and I'm an executive coach. I'm a business growth advisor, now 2-time author, and I got a lot of irons in the fire, but I like it that way.
Yeah, I think that helps. Honestly, I think having more irons in the fire helps being productive in some sense. For starters, thank you for your service in the military. I greatly appreciate all of our vets, for sure. When I was checking out this book, I noticed I've read a lot of productivity books and a lot of leadership books over the past, decade or so. I got really hooked on that, when I first became a manager, because I kind of sucked at it and I wanted to get better. But one thing I really like about your book is not just like here's a recipe for success. It's a lot about, if you want to do better work, here's how you can be a better person too. And it kind of melded in, kind of merged the groups of productivity and also improvement in life. Is that something you were going for, or is that just something that just kind of came out of it?
Thanks for seeing that. That actually is what I wanted to do. I wanted it to be this intersection of personal development and productivity, because the reality is, or at least my core belief is, we become by doing. We become by doing, and that comes way from Aristotle. And so if we want to be a better person in the world, we have to think about the things that we're doing to become that better person. And that also means that if what we're doing isn't helping us become the person we want to be, we need to do something different, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of what I was talking about when you asked about my background, is that I found that we're either too focused on doing or being, but we need to think about how those two intersect. And to be honest, John, like it's in some ways, I think it's a better book, and most ways I think it's a better book because it is a hybrid book. It can be challenging for people though, because like if you just want tactical, come in and get stuff done, you're going to be surprised by a lot of other things that are in it. And so it's just kind of where it sits on the shelf is an interesting sort of product marketing challenge that we found with the book.
Yeah, for sure. And I get a bunch of books from publishers and things that I'll check out from time to time. And I really like the title, Start Finishing, because working from a technology background, and project management, we like to limit work in progress. So we want people to get things done faster. So I thought, this would be helpful for that. And then when I got into it, I found it was that plus more. And I really liked the surprise, I guess, that I got, that it was more geared to building a better life as well as getting things done. It wasn't just this is just business, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the core thesis of the book, and I didn't do a good job of explaining it in the book as much as I've done, the 80 or 90 interviews I've done thus far is, we finished projects bridge the gap between our current reality and the life we want to live and the work we want to do, right? And so if you're not finishing the types of significant projects, I call them best work projects, that are making that change, then fundamentally your life and your work is going to stay stuck. And so I know, we're recording this at the end of the year, so people might be hearing this in the new year, and a lot of that new year, new you energy is focused around the positive changes we want to see in our life, obviously, because no one wants negative changes in their life. And so the book comes in and just really helps reinforce the idea that, look, if you do want to make that change, yeah, resolutions are great, aspirations are great, but it's really going to come down to the projects that you do that build that bridge towards it. And if you're not doing those projects, you're just going to stay stuck. And the other thing about it, and I know we're talking to technology leaders, is, and I'm so glad you mentioned the limiting work in progress, because in other contexts, I have to make a strong case for that, but you guys kind of get it.
Well, we say we get it, but we don't always act upon it.
Get it. Well, you at least know the theory behind it, if the practice falters. But the thing about it is that, what's the best way of saying this? We have no shortage of ideas. We all know that, right? And in our life and in our careers, we are, I think, too focused on how many projects we're carrying, how many ideas that we have. And I want to shift the needle to how many we're shipping, how many we're finishing. And, as we're talking about this hybrid sort of thing, in my language, anything that takes time, energy, and attention is a project. And so, cleaning out that closet of doom that we all seem to have somewhere, right? That's a project. Moving, getting married, getting the kids out of the house, getting the kids transitioned back and forth to school, throwing holiday parties, right? All those types of things are projects, but we don't think about them that way. And it's in some ways a real tragedy for me, and it's a real mystery for me, because we learn all of these ways for managing projects on the professional/economic side of things, but we don't apply them to the work of our lives. And the work of our lives gets sort of crammed into the cracks that are left over from the economic work. And quite frankly, there's not enough cracks to fill the type of life we want to live.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm a little bit lucky because, I'm lucky for lots of reasons. Let me go through that out there. But when it comes to projects, I always left projects at work. When I came home, I didn't want it to be a project. I didn't want to think about life as a project. But I did marry a project manager who kind of runs sometimes our household and our life kind of as a project. I mean, we have a Scrum board for our family projects and things like that, which is awesome, because once I started thinking about things in that facet, I realized that, man, I can free up time to spend more time with my kids, to do the fun things, to have those experiences if we plan them out like a project and execute them like a project.
Absolutely. And, one of the major things that I wanted to really get into with the book, or at least shift people's mindset about, is I think, unfortunately, people develop a story, I call it head trash, around they're being not good enough or not being able to get their stuff together, and then being procrastinators and being poor planners and things like that. And really, when we're looking at it, what it boils down to is you either making time for the thing that you're trying to do, or you're not. Mm-hmm. And that simplicity, if we put the pain of it up front and say, you know what, if you want to change your life, if you want to change your work, you want to change your business or your career, you have to prioritize differently. And then that means making time and space on your schedule and doing the planning and recruiting the people and so on and so forth. If you're not seeing the change you want, it doesn't come down to basically like whether you're good enough, whether you can, whether you got it all figured out or something. It's just whether you're prioritizing doing the work or not. And that's really, I think, liberating for a lot of people. And it also can be really challenging for a lot of people because it puts the onus and it puts the responsibility square where it needs to be, is on them and their decision making.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't like to get that responsibility put upon them, though, so they try to find an excuse or a way, or at least that's the way I was. I try to, well, if I don't try, then I can't fail.
Absolutely. And, we have so many stories around failure that keeps us from trying. But I think another major conversation that we need to have more of and more about is, what if I succeed? And what if I succeed and that changes my relationships with people? What if I succeed and that changes how I view myself? What if I succeed and I set a bar so high that I can't meet it again? Or what if I succeed, but by succeeding, it comes at the cost of burnout or mental breakdowns or so on and so forth? And so I think, yes, we absolutely do have stories around failure, but I think the richer ones and the more powerful ones are the ones where we're actually afraid of success because we've created some no-win scenarios around it.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things I liked about the book is that there's little sections of inspiration in there where, like, there's like a quote about, we're just, I can't remember exactly how it goes. I probably should have had it in front of me, but we're just another dragon slayer in a line of dragon slayers, and we're resilient. We can do things. And, when I read things like that, I was like, oh yeah, I can do things. I can move forward. And it's encouraging to see things like that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. When you realize that we are wired to overcome struggle and we are wired to overcome these challenges. And, I was thinking about this the other night, John, and it was sort of tangential to this conversation, but I was like, I was reading a book. Here's what happened. I was reading a Kindle book. It's a series of the Legacy Fleet series, sci-fi book. Doesn't matter. But I was like, you know what? I had that moment of appreciation that I was enjoying this book, and somebody else wrote it. Somebody else had crafted this entire world that I was involved in. But then I started thinking about it a little bit deeper. I'm reading it on a Kindle. I'm reading it, on a nice, comfy bed. I'm reading it on, through the internet. I'm reading it through all these types of things. I'm like, wow, all of this stuff is human creation. We have converted the very essence of the universe into these very cool things that oftentimes we just take for granted. And that is our baseline. That's who we are. Right. And so that's where when people are like, want to run from the challenges and things like that. And I realize, my military background kind of gives me a different perspective on that. But I'm like, you know what? I think in this world, we don't need to be smarter. We need to be more courageous. We need to be more willing to run towards the challenge, to run towards the dragon, to run towards the fire, because that's who we are.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't remember who it was. It might have been Todd Henry when I had him on the show. But we talked about, one of the things that we're most afraid of doing is probably the thing we need to do the most, And I think that's right. I think being courageous is the right word. We need to move towards those things that we're somewhat afraid of doing, because that sends us exactly where we need to be.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions in the book, as you know, John. But one of the ones that I can get people with is, like, when we're thinking about projects, like, I think there are two questions I can ask here. Mm-hmm. One, so listener, John, think about a current project that isn't right in front of you that maybe you're challenged or a little stuck by. Okay, got that project?
Yep.
Okay, question one, what's the smartest next step for that project? Question two is, what's the most courageous next step you could take for that project? Mm. Generally, people know number two, right? And it turns out that the most courageous next step is usually the smartest next step. Except for when we start going into our brains and we start thinking of, well, I can do X and I can do this strategy and I can do that strategy. Sometimes it's just like, ship to work, or sometimes it's as simple as talk to my boss about needing to pull back on my hours, or talk to my wife about something, or finally ask the person out. This is whatever it is. It's like that clear next step that's not hard mentally, but it's hard emotionally. It's that courageous piece. And so it's just one of those quick pro tips if you want to first sort of think from the cause. Like whenever you're stuck with a project, think about the most courageous next step you can take and take that. You're going to be way better off than spending the next 6 to 9 months Googling and fuxing around with a Scrum waterboard or whatever your default is. Just take that simple courageous step and build that muscle. And sometimes when I realize that I need to practice it, John, I'll just create a game for myself and give myself courage points, right? And so I'll think about what I'm doing. It's like, how many courage points would that be worth? And it's like, I racked up 10 courage points today. And gamifying it such that every day I have to get some courage points makes it so much easier, and it becomes the default, as opposed to that backlog that we can sometimes get where we do all the safe things until we realize we're stuck. And then we got to make what seems like a big courageous leap, as opposed to just making those day in, day out, and sort of inoculating ourselves to that discomfort.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you talk about is building momentum by taking those steps. What is one way that we can, I guess, gamifying with courageous points is one way for sure. What's another way we can help build that momentum by taking these small steps?
So I'll sort of back my way into it this way. And again, love the audience, so because you guys get it. Breadcrumbs are such a important concept and building that crumb trail from project to project. And again, we think about that when it comes to professional work. I know all the coders and geeks out there, how to leave comments in the GitHub. How to leave, I know I said the GitHub, that's funny as hell. How to leave comments on your work and to figure out what's going on. But we don't do that in our life, right? We don't necessarily, think about that closet of doom and think okay, I put something in here, remove it and leaving a sticky note somewhere in the closet, right? And so breadcrumbs, what they do is they help with that startup and release time of getting back into a project. And there's nothing worse than, having a project that was super important 3 weeks ago and you worked on it for a couple hours and then it went cold on you, and then you pick it up again and it takes you 45 minutes to figure out where you are, right? So that would be one piece. The second one is, and I talk a lot about this when it comes time to focus blocks, which are 90 to 120 minute blocks of time that you can just focus on a project. And we understand that on the creative knowledge work side of things, but it might be, again, that you need to carve out enough significant time to get out in that garage and clean it out, And so really thinking of sort of the guideline of 3 focus blocks per week per project. And if you can't allocate that amount of focus blocks, then you might want to consider whether you need to finish another of your works in progress and then use a waterfall to claim the time that project had to apply to this new one. Because I think one of the reasons we go to a thrash crash, and thrashing is just my word for that meta work and flailing and rummaging and sort of quote unquote research that we do around work that doesn't actually push the work forward.
Yeah, it's one of those busy tasks that I think it's a form of laziness because we're just being busy so we don't have to actually do the work.
Sometimes, right? And so there's people confuse themselves between pure procrastination and productive procrastination.
Yes.
And so productive procrastination is actually where you find things like cleaning up your office that let your brain down cycle and work through a problem. And so you kind of find those things that do actually move you forward towards solutions. But unfortunately, people will tell themselves it's sort of that random research that you're doing. So pro tip on research, this is for everyone. If you don't have a question that you're looking for before you start researching, it's unlikely that you're going to find at least the answer to the problem you started with. You might find 18 other bright, shiny objects, but the one you're looking for, you're probably not to find. So whenever you're like, oh, I need to do some research, come up with the specific problems you're trying to find solutions to. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do that, it might be a sign that you're just procrastinating. Yeah, and
I found for me, a lot of times I will if I don't schedule my productive procrastinations, I'll end up doing it way too long. So one of the things I do is on Fridays, I call it my fun day Friday. After lunch on Friday, I'm gonna do. That's when I'm gonna clean my office. That's when I'm gonna do things that aren't related to the tasks that I typically do throughout the week. It's gonna be something totally different that will help me get my mind, in that. It's where I find my ideas typically. I find, the creative ideas or solutions that I'm not, that are on the fringes. I find them on my Fun Day Friday.
Yeah, and I would suggest that productive procrastination activities be physical activities. So it could be, cleaning your office, because that organizing, that sorting, that recruits your body into the problem solving. And so, unfortunately, what we do all too often is when we have like a cerebral or a work problem, we sort of stare at the problem so long and we hope our brain can just crack it. And unfortunately, we keep coming up with the same solutions, because what fires together wires together, right? Yeah. And so just switching it up and cleaning out your office, or going on a hike, or, going to the gym, meditating, vacuuming the house, making cookies. I don't care what it is, but if you recruit your body into it, you're more likely to actually have a full down cycle. Mental down cycle that helps you find the solution, and two, you're going to have less body pains, because this is a random aside here, but we have to really recognize how much the work that we do, especially creative knowledge work and so on and so forth, is actually destructive to our bodies, and that can show up in our thinking and in our work.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And you talk, about those blocks that we were just talking about, and you have that somewhere in a pyramid. I think it's down at the bottom of a project pyramid. Can you explain that project pyramid and kind of how blocks and tasks fit into your goals on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis?
Yeah, so I'm going to tackle this from the bottom and then from the top. So you mentioned blocks and tasks. And so as a very simple way of figuring out how to work your day, think in terms of two quantas of time. So one is a focus block. That's a 90 to 120 minute block of time. And the other is a 15-minute task. And that could be, making that phone call, doing that email, like updating something in Slack, all those types of things. And I think I'm going to pause here because we discount how long those admin tasks take individually. We think it's just going to be 3 minutes, or we think it's just going to take a second. But every time our brain switches context like that, it takes between 3 to 6 minutes for our brain to catch up and move to the next thing. So
it's that switching cost, right?
It's a switching cost. And so if you assume that it's going to take 15 minutes, you actually can make way better plans. And not to get over anal about it, but it's like if you got to, send 10 emails that day, that's going to be 2.5 hours. Where does that 2.5 hours live on your schedule? And if it doesn't, then something else is going to shift. And when many people do a sort of audit of the actual real requirements of their work, they find that, 40% of their job is just doing stuff like sending emails and jumping on Slack and updating and things like that. But they assume at every new work slice that they have 100% of their capacity to use on whatever that is. So plan on 2 hours for you to actually get in to do stuff, and 15 minutes, 15-minute increments to do sort of that administrivia around it. Okay, so the project pyramid is basically the idea that if we go to the top of the pyramid and we think of year-size goals, year-size projects, we understand intuitively that those can be broken down into, quarter-size projects. Mm-hmm. And just to take a purely simple, oversimplified model, like one annual project could turn into 4 quarter-size projects, which each turn into 3 month-size projects, which each turn into 4 week-size projects. And then in those weeks are those days and those blocks that I just talked about. And if you think about it, it's this pyramid where that one thing spawned off all of these things at the bottom. And this is why, I later talk about the 5 projects rule, which you might jump into, but this is why you see so much advice around picking 2, 3, maybe 1, or, major projects for the year and focusing on that. Because when you understand how that one project breaks down into all these goals, you can see how easy it is to stack. And so, when I'm doing any consulting or someone's like, on a community call or at a talk, and they're like, well, I got all these things. Here are my 7 goals for next year. One of the first things that I'll look at is, unless, sometimes we make like a month-sized goal and we put that as a resolution, which that can happen. But if they're truly 7 year-sized goals, the first thing I'm going to say is, like, we don't actually need to start with planning. We need to start with prioritization and culling, because the odds of you doing that are not really great. And I know a lot of people can read that, John, and sometimes be like, well, that's really pessimistic. But you do this work long enough, you see the studies, and most of us in our peak performance, we're not getting more than 5 major projects done at any time anyways.
Right.
Committing to 17 is only just making you, do more project management that's not actually project doing, know? And so better to use our capacity as a gauge for the projects we commit to, than to use just our pure aspirations to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I started my role where I'm at now, it's and I've been here for about 3 years. When I got here, we looked at our project management org with the different groups we're working on, and I had one team in particular that had 17 open projects. You mentioned 17; it's just a random number that just happens to be the same number. And what I did is I immediately put all but 5 of those on hold, and I said, work on these 5, and never let more than 5 get into this work in progress. What we're calling our doing column in our Scrum board. And once the team did that, like basically me just saying all these are on hold. You don't have to work on these or think on these. Their productivity just went up because that mental, it was something like the processes were being used to mentally keep track of that thing, even if no work was getting done, just because it was in the doing column.
Yeah, it's like, think about it, and let's switch metaphors here. Like we're air traffic controllers, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we have all these planes just flying around and they can't land. How much tracking do we have to do in communication and so on and so forth, when really we know we can only land 5 at a time anyways, right? Land and take off 5 at a time. It would be better to manage our throughput based upon that. And, the common pushback, and again, I know our audience here, so it may not be such a thing, but the common pushback is like, that's not enough for us to get done. Like we can't just get that amount of done because we'll fall behind. But in reality, what's your current completion rate? So when I go into companies, I talk about the commit to completion rate of the projects we commit to in a time slice. How many do we complete? And, I'm really hard on leaders because I'm like, if it's under 80%, then we got a problem, because that means that your team knows that 1 out of every 5 projects is going to stall and, get stuck and so on and so forth. And so and they know that's a systemic thing. That's just how the company operates, right? We can understand that, stuff happens. And I would say, like, if you know that there's a 40% chance that this project you're working on is going to get stuck, stall, or end up in that board that you talked about, it really demotivates people to focus on that, right? And they're going to focus on the things that keep them from getting fired or get them promoted. So we might as well prioritize those things that are going to get them promoted or keep them from getting fired and let go of the rest.
Right. And I got a copy of this book back in September. So one of the things that I did at the end of the month, you mentioned focus block. So I decided I was going to try it out and do a test. So I blocked from 10 a.m. till noon, Monday through Friday on my calendar, and put on there project focus. And that was my calendar task, and that's what I was going to do. And each day I had a project that I was going to focus on during that time, and I would turn off Slack, turn off Outlook, shut my office door, and work on something related to that project. And what I found is that during that 2-hour period, I typically got more done than I did the rest of the entire day. And so, yeah, I think it works for sure.
Well, thanks for that. And just as a comment, I love how you did that, and thank you for doing that. But there are 2 great things about the way you did it that are important. One is you made it from 10 to 12, which means that you were able to get to work and do that sort of work startup sort of stuff and can stop the chattering monkeys about everything that you need to do to get to work, right?
Yeah.
2, you did it such that you had some flexibility on the back end with lunch, I presume.
Correct.
And so I'm imagining that there are some days where you just cranking hard and you were done after 90 minutes. And you were just able to be like, okay, I'm done. I'm either going to do some admin or I'm going to take an early lunch. Or you might be one of those positions where, like, you were cranking hard and you needed to bleed into lunch a little bit to really wrap that project up. But that flexibility on there, which is why I like saying 90 to 120 minutes, because creativity and the type of thing that you're doing, it's not like evenly spread. It's not mechanistic in the way that we like calendar planning to be. Sometimes it's going to be 90 minutes. Sometimes it's going to be 2.5 hours. But if we plan for it to be, sort of on that average cycle, then we can get that. But did you find that yourself?
Yeah, and honestly, most days I left for lunch about 11:45 because I get to a stopping point and it's like, well, I feel good. I feel like I was productive. My energy was high. I felt like I'd achieved something. It was I was going to reward myself with an early lunch, or a little bit longer lunch.
Yeah, well, and the other thing about that is I'm so pumped. So thanks for doing that, John, and supplying it for this conversation, is because what many people find is that once they do a for real focus block like that, the rest of the day is just great. Like all the meetings that you would normally be frustrated about being in, all the conversations, all the admin, all the stuff, you're like, you know what? I did my thing. Like I got to do the work. Like I can be 100% generous and present with everything else that happens and feel good about it, as opposed to being like, oh crap, like I got to do the thing, but I got to go to this meeting, or someone's asking for a project update. Like enables this really open generosity and presence because you gave yourself that time. And many people find the same thing, John. Like that 2 hours is really, it not replaces, but they get more done in that 2 hours than they do for the rest of the day. And again, if you do this day in, day out, you do it for a quarter, your productivity, your satisfaction, your momentum will just skyrocket.
Yeah, for sure. And there's been days, where something has come up and like interrupted it, and I couldn't, when you lead a tech group, things happen. You have to sometimes jump out of it. But I was very clear with my team, when I don't have an open door policy. If my door's shut, it's shut. If it's open, then it's open. Come on in. But if it's shut, it's shut. And if I was able to shut that door and close off, maybe it didn't start directly at 10 because another meeting lasted a little bit longer or something like that. But once I got in there and was able to shut the door, the productivity, took off, and it made me think of a quote. I think it was by, I don't remember who it was by, you probably know, but it was one of those things where it says, I only write when productivity or when creativity strikes. It just happens to be that creativity strikes every morning at 8 a.m.
Yeah. I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that same thing where I got enough, and I felt so good about the things that I did finish that honestly, if I would have left work at noon and did no more work the rest of the day, I still would have felt like I had a productive day. And so like you said, going to meetings after that, which, majority of my meetings, I usually have some right at the beginning of the day, 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then I have some that are usually about 2 o'clock until the rest of the day. When I came back from lunch and got into those meetings, I didn't feel like I needed to rush out of those meetings to do something. I'd already accomplished all that stuff, already taken care of it, and I didn't have that desire to, oh gosh, I got to get this thing out before the end of the day. No, I've already got it out. It's done.
Yeah, it's done. What's next? What are we doing? And there's that confidence where both as a manager, but also as, the creative teammate, where, you just can go into work and know that you're going to put points on the board and know that you're going to be able to talk about the points that you got put on the board. And it's not going to be those conversations about what needs to happen and what's behind and so on and so forth. Those suck. They just do, right? But when you're, can show up for that meeting like, hey, I did the thing, right? Mm-hmm. Or, you're looking at your Scrum board, or you're looking at your, work in progress board, and you're like, complete, done. It builds a completely different sort of relationship with your teammates. And it's just really, really powerful. The other thing that I was going to say is about this is setting your schedule up so that you have regular focus blocks the way that you did also lets our brain sort of think about where work should land and where it can't land. Because if that you do your weekly planning and you commit to those focus blocks and you're like, okay, I've got these projects, those slots are filled. When that new thing comes in, you have one of two questions. One, what from this week's plan gets bumped to do this thing because it's a higher priority? Or two, if it's not a higher priority this week, where does it go? When does it get the next available work block? And it just helps with better commitments and fight off bright, shiny objects and things that should never get prioritized in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. Two more things about this. One, I just want to say to anybody that, being the kind of the head of the technology group, it's easy for me to do this. I kind of set my own schedule. But if any one of my employees would have come to me and said, hey, from this period to this period, my calendar's booked because I'm doing something, to help myself productivity, I'm going to look really highly on them, and I'm going to be thankful that they're doing something like that. And I think some people are afraid to approach their boss and have that conversation. But, from a boss's perspective, I think it's a great thing for employees to show initiative to do something like that.
Yeah, I'd also say that a great way to really use this is to sit down with your team and come up with like a weekly block schedule. Mm-hmm. Hopefully your span and control is not so much that this becomes, over laborious, and that's an organizational issue that you might have to go through. But if your span and control is, in that typical 3 to 7 range, mm-hmm. then, you can sort of look at a week and say, okay, guys, when are you most fired up to do work? Or what does it make sense for you to do it? And really honor that people have different chronotypes, right? And chronotypes are just the idea that we have different energies at different types of the day, and they're the morning birds, they're the afternoon ones, and they're the night owls. And to really say, like, where does it make the most sense for you to carve out a focus block every day? We're willing to make that commitment. Every day you get a focus block, and to sort of map that out, you might find that it's time to rework your meeting schedule, right? You might find that there are different ways that your team can collaborate. And for most of the time, especially in the industry we're talking about here, like, people need their introverted, I'm getting stuff done time, right? Yeah. And just to say, you know what, as their boss, as their team leader, like, hey, I see you. We're making that a priority. And not only it's okay for you to do that, but we expect you to do this. And what also is a part of that commitment is next time we have our scrum meeting or next time we have our project meeting, like we can be better we can ask different questions, because it's like, hey, did you use that focus block for the project that you committed to? Or maybe you don't have enough focus blocks, and you shift the conversation from just looking at the individual and their capacity and their capabilities versus looking at the systemic and temporal issues that may be keeping them from doing the work that they most want to do. Because especially in the tech field, there's this really fascinating thing that wakes me up in the morning, John. It's like, when you think about it, one, most people love to get stuff done, right?
Yes.
Especially if it matters to them. That's one. Two, we love to make our peers, we love to make our peers happy and to be in the good social graces of other people, right? Two. Three, this is the negative side of that. No one wants to show up and be criticized and, be that person on the team who didn't get it done. And so when you sort of look at those sort of three things, we look at it from an organizational or from a culture perspective and say, okay, if those are our core human drives and we're not getting stuff done, we need to stop looking at the people. We need to start looking at what's keeping them from doing the things that they most want to do.
Yeah, I think I know for me, with one of my old teams that I managed, it was finding that purpose of what we were doing and explaining that to people so that they got kind of energized in that fashion. But one thing I wanted to get back on, we were talking about time of day. How does one figure out what time of day they are the most productive? Because I've asked some people and they said, well, I'm productive all day long. I'm like, well, that can't be true. Because I know for me, it's the morning for me. That's why I picked that focus time before lunch. Because after lunch, I can just take a nap. I don't, my mind is usually all over the place. I have a lot harder time focusing after lunch than I do before lunch. That's why I picked it right before lunch. But how can you help someone, maybe someone on your team or someone else, figure out what their focus time is?
So 3 questions. One is, when do you have to work, right? And when do you not have to work? And because there's some people, when they say I'm productive all day long, that might be true, but they're not evenly productive. That's the whole point, right? Sometimes you're just on fire and the work is easier to do than others. And so if you know when it's work to work, then you might be able to figure out when it's not work to work, i.e. when you can find those flow periods.
Yeah.
2 would be to ask people what their energy is like when they have days off. Not the first day off, but holidays is a good time for that. So you got to think, on that second or third day off, when do they have the most energy? And the reason I ask that is because we default, like when we go to work, we can be over caffeinated and overdriven by the schedule. And so that affects when we feel productive. Because we're under that pressure. But when we let go of those constraints, many people will find that there's certain types of day that they feel more productive than others. And so the third one would be not when are you productive, but when do you feel the most productive? And the other thing that I would want to say is we got to couch this and give people. We got to get below that sort of common conversation that we're supposed to be mechanistically productive and evenly productive throughout the day. And that, there may be fallow periods. So, we're talking about focus blocks here. Another thing that we could really focus more on as team leaders and managers is understanding that our teammates, like, for instance, I'll give an example. I've got a teammate who every day from 1 to 3, it's a really fallow period for her. She's not fired up, so she takes a longer lunch and things like that, but she works from 3 to 6 and sometimes she gets up early. So I just know for her, that 1 to 3 period is not going to be a peak productive period. And to give her the space and give her the autonomy to do what she needs to do during those periods. And I think once we do that without sort of that expectation that, like, if you're at work, you're cranking 10 units per hour for, the whole time. No, it's not the way it works. You might crank 15 units per hour in the morning, and then you might slow down to 6 units in the afternoon because that's just your energetic cycle.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, for sure. I think I think when a leader expects their team to always be the exact same productivity, whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the evening, they're fooling themselves, because you're right. We've got to get into that understanding that individuals on teams will have different productivity schedules. And sometimes you have to work your meetings during those times, and there's going to be some time of overlap you have to figure out for projects. And maybe different people will work on different projects based off that productivity time as well.
Yeah. So 10 to 1 in our team tends to be like the collaborative pulse hours, where most people are on and are in a space. Like, I've got a person who is actually she's an emu, which is the name that I give those afternoon birds, because they're larks in the morning and owls in the afternoon. I thought the emu should have a name. So she's an emu, so that I know that first thing in the morning, she's just not going to be fired up. She's not going to be in it. But in the afternoon, and it helps that she's my schedule boss, she's on fire from 2 to 6. But she can be in a good collaborative zone from 10 to 1, so if we needed to have some meetings, if we need to have some conversations, if she needs to check into Slack. So that becomes sort of a check-in time for people in that heavy pulse period. But then after that, people kind of do whatever they want to do. I've got another teammate that teaches yoga. I don't know what time she teaches yoga in the afternoon. I don't care, because she gets it done, right? And yeah, just understanding that, yes, individuals are going to have their own daily pulses. Your team is going to have its own daily pulse, and furthermore, your team is going to have a unique weekly pulse that, if you really get clear of and you just change some of these blocks of time around, will make the team way more productive with way less effort and a lot less of that rummaging. So you may find, for instance, that having your team meetings on Tuesday is better than on Monday, because on Tuesday they've been able to use Monday to get caught up on projects and make some momentum to do their own individual work and to show up fully present on Tuesday, as opposed to Monday crashing into work and trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. I think Monday is sometimes challenging to know what you're going to be working on, because you just got back from the weekend. You probably forgot everything that you did on Friday. At least I do. The weekend's kind of my reboot time. So yeah, sometimes it takes me a little bit on Monday morning to get things going before I'm ready. So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about habits in the book too, and building practices and routines. What are some of the values and benefits of having those kind of habits and routines put in place?
So one of the major values of habits is that it lowers the decision fatigue that we can face throughout the day. So, we got to think of all the different micro decisions we make throughout the day. Habits basically remove those and automate so much of those. And so it's the same as if you had to do the same core functions in your app by hand or manually every time versus automating it, right? So that's one of the first things that it will do for you. The second thing is that you get to this place to where things happen without the seeming effort for them to happen, right? So these are two different things. One is about decision fatigue. The second one is about more effortless action, and having that sort of flow throughout the day. And in my language, habits are sort of like the atomic element of things. Hat tip to my good bud James Clear with Atomic Habits, where routines are collections of habits that fire automatically, right? One on top of each other. So if you have a beginning of the day routine, if you have beginning of the day work routine, and we'll focus on that, right? The end of the day work routine, the once you get home routine, all those type of things, you can set it up so that you have this flow where things are happening automatically and you're not having to make a bunch of decisions, and you'll just notice that your mental clarity increases, your energy increases, but also your momentum increases as well. Yeah,
for sure. I think that's I think it was Steve Jobs who said he always wore the same thing to reduce that decision fatigue.
Yeah. I mean, I did the same thing this morning. I've got a couple pair of pants that I wear every day at work. I work from home, so I get to do that. But, I wear the same pants. I just don't think about it. It's are they clean or not? And if they're clean, I put them on. Same with shirts and things like that. So, again, I think most people are not aware of how many micro decisions they make a day. And so even something simple as eating the same thing every day for breakfast, right? It can get old. but it can also prevent that, 15 minutes of rummaging around and trying to figure out what you're going to eat, when basically you need to get macronutrients in you so that you can, get on with the day.
Yeah, I think I found that batching also helps with that, like meal prep. For example, instead of trying to decide what my kids are going to eat for lunch every day of the week, we decide all that on Saturday, and then on Sunday night, we make all their lunches for the week, and there they go. It's all ready to go.
Yeah, a hack here is like pretend like you're ADHD. And the reason I say that is because when we're ADHD, it's hard to focus. It's hard to make decisions, and we can get over-focused at different times. But if you pretend that and you do the most that you can to limit the sort of amount of decisions and braining that you have to do every day, it's just going to make your life a lot easier. So yeah, rather than deciding 3 times a day what you're going to eat, take a focus block on the weekend, figure out what you're going to eat for the entire week, and then do that, and you're done with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Man, this has been a lot of fun. Do you have any other pieces of advice or tips you want to offer to the audience, and also tell them how they could pick up your book and find out more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, I'll try to make this brief, but I think a major unlock that people have had from the book is thinking in terms of success packs, which are the groups of people that you put around your projects that really help them go forward. And this don't just have to be your coworkers; these could be your life partners. These could be people in your community, and also the mentors that you might want to put on that. So the main point there is focus less on individual productivity and focus more on collective or community productivity, and you'll just see your motivation with your work, and you'll see your progress just really shift. And this is even, if you're an introvert. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to slide that in there so that we remember to include other people and recruit them into our projects, as opposed to always thinking all too often that there are obstacles to getting things done.
Right.
So if you would like to check out the book, you can go to startfinishingbook.com. That's all one word. You can get a sample chapter there. It's available pretty much anywhere you can get a book. And if you're interested in the broader body of work that I have, it's at productiveflourishing.com. All
right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I'll link up the book in the show notes. It'll also be on our guest books page as well. And hopefully people will check it out. I thought it was a really good book. Like I said, I like the kind of melding of the two different theories in there. It was just great. Great read.
Thanks so much, John.
Thank you to our sponsor, Splashtop. Check out Splashtop Remote Support Premium that provides you with endpoint remote monitoring and management features, including mass deployment features, all at a fraction of what other tools cost. So check that out and get 20% off and a free trial at geekleader.com/splashtop. Again, that's at geekleader.com/splashtop.